Hello, I'm Amy from moonmindology.com, and today I'm going to be looking at the chart of Emmanuel Macron, the leader of France. So let's jump right in. The first and the second ruler is in the 8th house. So this can cause some problems in early life, which can lead to a low self-esteem. But the 8th house is about charm as well. So he can come across as very charming. I don't think he is. There can be problems with accidents, as well as the interest in other people's money. And of course, other people's money is tax, as well as banking in general. So his money can be made through someone else, and in some cases money can be made through illicit sources. Take that as you will. And as the second ruler is in the 8th house, there can sometimes be a problem with telling the truth. The second house is all about the speech, the communication, the mouth, what goes in and out of your mouth. And when it's in the 8th, that's a Dastana. Saturn in the 8th is linked to longevity, but it can also have a negative impact on children as it aspects the 5th house. And there can be a problem with consuming the wrong things. There can also be problems with romance and difficulty with self-expression. So there can be problems with tax as well. Saturn being here is an Arista yoga, which is about suffering in order to attain enlightenment. And as this is the 1st house ruler, there can be a problem with health and chronic disease. Saturn is retrograde as well, which shows us that there is a boundary issue. So just like Volodymyr Zelensky, there are problems with setting boundaries, and there can be a problems with subservience in relationship, and it forces people to face the fears of realities in life. So the 8th ruler is in the 12th, and this is a Viparita yoga, and this can give gains and losses. And there can also be a great interest in traveling to foreign countries as well. So there's a deep love for spirituality and a desire for asceticism as well, as it's the 12th house. His current situation, so him being, the sun is in the 12th house, which is a bit of a sign that Macron didn't quite get on with his father, and there can be a separation between the two. But it's very good for spirituality. And if you think about it, the sun is the heart. So his heart is in 12th house matters, which can have a spiritual connotation to it. However, there can be a bit of a problem with self-esteem, but there can be an attraction to things that are foreign and mysterious and out of this world. He might be even interested in space. The sun is conjunct Mercury. So this can give a bright and clear mind, really intelligent people, and it's great for analytics as well. And of course, he came from banking and he came from economics. This is all a very analytical type of industry. The sun is opposed Jupiter, and this can give a lot of self-importance as well as enthusiasm. But the problem is that sometimes it can be a little bit too much. When it's exaggerating Jupiter, it can make people very proud and, in the worst case scenario, arrogant. Mercury is in the 12th house, and this is another sign that there is an interest in spirituality and things that are foreign. But Mercury is the Karaka for communications. So there can be problems with communications with this planet being in a Dastana. So he does appear to have no problems with public speaking, seeing as he does a lot of public speaking and he's the leader of a country. It's just that people do not like his ideas or what he has to say. There is a Viparita yoga, which shows that he needs to be careful around machinery and vehicles and things like that. If this yoga is activated, there can be accidents, there can be problems, but there can also be benefits. There's also a link between work and institutions, and of course that makes sense because 6th house is your daily work, the 12th house is institutions. What does he do for a living? He is the leader of France. What's the biggest institution? It's the government, especially in a socialist country. But as the 12th house ruler, or the 12th house is a Dastana house, and the 6th ruler is there can be a problem with co-workers, servants, and underlings. The 9th ruler is in the 12th, and that can give problems with the father. And there can be a divide between them. Again, as another sign, we've got 2 signs of problems with the father now, but also there's a deep interest in philosophy and spirituality. There's multiple tales on these things, so I would start to say his relationship with his father isn't that great, and Macron is more spiritual than he lets on. Mercury is retrograde, so this creates problems with peers to help him strengthen education, communication, and just general ideas. But there can be problems with relationships, which gives the opportunities to grow in these areas. Also can create problems with career, and think about it, he is very lucky. He has a great career, but his reputation is horrendous. He rose to fame quickly, but people just don't like him. They just don't like him. And on that subject, he could change his career multiple times. Jupiter is in the 6th, and there can be health problems that are related with the liver, the gallbladder, that kind of thing. But it's good for career as Jupiter aspects the 10th house. And there can also be a love for animals. I haven't been able to find any information on whether he's like a big animal lover or not, but looking at his chart, I would say he's interested in animals. But he has no children. So Jupiter being the Karaka for children, and it's sitting in a Dastana house, is a supporting element in the chart that shows us that that is a possibility that he would not have children. Of course, usually there has to be multiple tells, but he does also have Saturn aspecting his 5th house, which is another sign that there may not be any children. The 3rd and the 12th ruler, Jupiter, is in the 6th house. So once again, this is about healing and spirituality, but it's another Vipri yoga, so gains from unfortunate events. Mercury and Jupiter are in a Parivartana yoga, so they are deeply connected. Not only that, they aspect each other as they are opposing. There can be problems with servants, subordinates. So the ruler of the 7th and the 4th are in each other's houses. So you've got the Moon and Mars, and they swap places. And if you know anything about Macron, he met his wife when he was about 15 years old, and she was his school teacher. She's 24 years older than him and old enough to be his mother. So there is an interesting link between the 4th house of the mother and the 7th house. So that's quite an interesting combination. So the chart would say to me, the wife can be nurturing, and there is elements of good, marital happiness, and the spouse could be somebody who owns property, but that's just looking at the placements, the swapping of those 2 planets. However, Mars in the 7th is debilitated in Cancer. This isn't great for marriage. Not only that, Mars in the 7th is Kuja dosha, so that causes contention and difficulty within the marriage and within the relationships. So it's also a high probability of divorce. And just going back to Saturn in the 8th house, when you have planets in the 8th house, there is a possibility of divorce. There is a possibility. It's not a definite, it's a possibility. A malefic planet in the 7th house, though, that can be living in a foreign country. So Mars is also aspected by Ketu, and any planets that aspect the 7th ruler or a planet in the 7th house can influence it. So Ketu aspecting Mars can be about addictions. It can be people who are not quite accepted in society. And if you look at the nature of their relationship, she is so much older than him. She was a school teacher. That's pretty taboo. If you look at that situation, he was very, very young. He was an immature child. But there can also be secrets, addictions, and it's another sign of divorce. But it can be a very spiritual and unusual spouse. So there could be a spiritual attraction between them because Macron, as I've said, is most likely pretty spiritual. The 11th ruler is in the 7th, which can bring partners through groups and associations. So the spouse will be a good friend, and there can be business partners that are friends also. But there can be people that interfere with the marriage. And this did happen because a lot of people, including Macron's parents, didn't particularly think that it was good for him to be with a woman who is 24 years his senior. And from what I read, his parents were so anti this relationship that I think they took him out of that school and sent him away somewhere else so they would be separated. But of course, years later, they came back together. Venus is in the 11th house, and it gives great virtue with friends and groups. People will be attracted to him and give him lots of opportunities. And this is great for investment and speculation, which is what his banking career was all about prior to becoming the president of France. So the ruler of the 10th in the 11th can give great gains and professional advantages via associates and acquaintances. So power and fame can be actualized with this combination, as it gives great networks. He would have had access and the ability to mix with groups of people who would be very, very useful to him. And they say it's not what you know, it's who you know. And with this setup, you'd never have to ever worry about the who, as he would have access to these kind of things. Now, Neptune is closely conjunct the 10th ruler as well, and this can create a little bit of controversy and scandal around the career. And the whole time he has been the president, he has been scrutinized by the people. There's been almost constant protests, whether it's the yellow jackets or the yellow vests. I think yellow jackets is a wasp. And of course, you've had the recent protests against the pension reform bill that he forced through. The 5th and the 11th are linked together. Sometimes it can be associated with the adoption of children, but it can also be really good for friends and groups. So that's influential friends who can assist him in power within the community. And the 5th and the 11th axis is very, very political. And of course, that is what his acquaintances brought him into, a political circle. Venus is conjunct Neptune, and this is a very artistic and spiritual and compassionate combination, but it can be a little bit of a tendency to fantasize and idolize. There can also be a problem with fitting women into one of two categories, one of which is akin to being a prostitute and the other is of a saint. So there can also be disappointments and secrets in romance as well. And if we look back, I have said that before, possibility of secrets and deception in relationships. Neptune in the 11th can bring dishonest friends and addictive personalities, but it can also bring scandals within friendships and groups. But he could be mixing with people who are very idyllic, idealistic, and glamorous. They say that Neptune is the higher octave of Venus, so both of them are very beautiful. They can be very soft in some ways. So this is the sort of people that he will mix with. Undoubtedly, he'd probably mix with movie stars and artists. I'd probably say they are the kind of people that he rubs elbows with. Neptune is all about retaliating against the status quo, but it can be spiritual, and it's linked to spiritual groups and friends. Uranus is in the 10th, which can give sudden changes in career as well as unusual jobs. And this can be linked to technology and things that are foreign. When you deal with politics, a lot of it is geopolitics, it's global, it's foreign. What has Macron done since it's all kicked off in Ukraine? He's even tried to copy Volodymyr Zelensky's dress style, and he's been all over him. So there's a little bit of that. You can see that there is that fascination and that link to foreign interests. But also, Macron shot up out of nowhere. He was, I believe, an independent candidate, or a candidate who wasn't very popular, and he was going against renowned political leaders that were popular consistently, and people voted for Macron. Suddenly, little Mr. Nobody, well, he's got good connections, but to the general public, suddenly he shot up and had this position. And Uranus is a clue to that suddenness, sudden change in career. So I wouldn't be surprised, as quickly as he rose up into his career is probably as quickly as he will get out of this career and go into a new one. All sudden movements. So Ketu is in the 3rd house, which can create some losses around siblings. So this is a second sign that there are problems with siblings, as well as Mars being debilitated, and that is the character for siblings. There can also be problems in early education, but it makes people who think outside the box and have a very strong will. There can also be a deep interest in things like photography and film, and he may like really old films. He may be interested in Hollywood and that kind of thing. I wouldn't be surprised, seeing as all his friends are most likely some kind of arty sort. Ketu aspects Venus as well. So Venus is the character for romance and the wife in a man's chart. Ketu, just like aspecting the 7th ruler, aspecting Venus is a possibility for divorce. There are so many signs that his marriage is troubled, that when you see him and he behaves like his wife is some kind of goddess, we've seen that with the Neptune Venus, things are not all so hunky-dory. They're not. It's just, I can't see how he could be having this blissful relationship. I think it's a front. Rahu is in the 9th house, and this can give a lot of interest in law, religion, and philosophy, but there can be an attraction to extreme teachers or even cults. In some cases, the father can have an addiction, because the 9th house is the father, or the father can be a very odd character, overbearing, quite extreme. But it can also be successful. Rahu being in the 9th can create a very successful student, or somebody who is constantly learning. His Rahu Dasha would have started around the late 2000s, which is when he came into power, I would say. I think that's around about the time he got married. And what is Rahu sitting next to? Pluto. So it's pulling that energy in. It's very closely conjunct Pluto. And that could have given him his unstoppable rise to power. So all the time he is in the Mahadasha of Rahu, he can be pretty unstoppable. And of course, what's the dispositor of Virgo? It's Mercury. It's sitting in the 12th, right next to the Sun. The Sun is the character of kings. Pluto in the 9th is another sign of an overbearing father, and there can be an obsessive interest in religion and law, philosophy, that kind of thing. But there can also be a tendency towards thinking that they know better than the scholars and the philosophers, and they can rebel against their teachers. As Macron is in the Rahu Mahadasha until 2026, he's going to be powerful, and this is why he remained in power. He's currently in the subdansha of Venus, which gives him luck and a rising career with speculations as well as good networking. From February 2024, he'll go into the subdarsha of the Sun, which can bring up scandals and maybe even losses in some case. But in 2025, he will move into the subdasha of the moon, and that could bring some kind of instability, changes in property, and there can be an instability in the happiness, but also in his relationships as well. And in 2026, he moves into the final stage of the Rahu subdasha, and that is Mars, and that's debilitated. So debilitated planets can cause significant problems for the natives when they are activated. So this could cause problems with business and marriage, as well as security. So looking over his transits, Pluto is going to be going over Macron's ascendant this year, which can give him great power. But Pluto is also about corruption. So there could be some kind of corrupt thing going on. But it's also explosive. So he could be explosive and manipulative during this time. But it's a great time of transformation. Now, Neptune is going to be traveling through his third house, and it's not got long gone into Pisces, and that can bring some confusion around his ideas as well as his fantasies, and he could be a little bit delusional, but it could also steer him into that spiritual nature as well. Rahu and Uranus are in the fourth house, and this can create sudden changes to his happiness and also to his security. But he can feel like he's on a pedestal, but things change very quickly. There can be changes and extremes in the home, but also in the home land. And if you think about it, he has had a lot of kickback from protests and from the people since he's been in power. As I stated before, the whole time Uranus has been in his fourth house. I don't see things changing until Rahu and Uranus leave Aries, which is going to be, so Rahu leaves in November and Uranus leaves next year. Ketu is in his 10th house, and that shows that there can be some problems with his reputation, but he can also suffer delusions of grandeur as well. And he may be quite detached how people see him. And he may be even think, people don't understand my great ideas. You know, they've just got to get on with it. Eventually they'll be happy about it and blah, 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 blah. But he also has to be careful about accidents in the workplace as well with Ketu here. Saturn is in his second house, which is another security issue, and he may be focusing on securing money during this time and putting structures in place. He has just passed a bill to increase the pension age, which is a way of clawing back money from the people. Money can be restricted when Saturn is in the second house, and I would say he's probably trying to stop France going into a recession. We all know the whole world is struggling after the events of 2020 and so on. And this is the way he is trying to handle it. But Saturn aspects the 11th, which brings problems with groups and friends and associates as well. The 8th house is also aspect, and there can be problems with inheritances, other people's money. Jupiter is in the 4th house, which will probably play more of a part in driving previous factors out of control as everything is congregated in that one house. I wouldn't be surprised if something extreme is happening with the price of land in France. There's also an aspect to Saturn in the 8th, which is a link to taxation. There's also an aspect to the 12th house, and that contains Mercury and the sun, so there could be expenses at the moment. And I actually wonder with these aspects whether the protest that he is causing more of a money deficit than would have happened had he not have done this. So it's costing money, and there's expenses from extreme communication and kickback from the will of the people. However, I do expect that he will hold very tight on what he's already decided on. And on the 16th of May, he did have an exact aspect from Jupiter to his natal planets, and that is when his great-nephew-in-law was beaten in a politically motivated attack. So this is a threat to his security and the 12th house of crime as well, as that was activated. But next few months up to November, we will probably see more of this. It's not going to calm down until the end of the year, and it may even continue into next year, as Jupiter is going to be in Aries until April 2024. Thank you very much for sharing this chart with me. I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content from me. And if you want your own reading, please go to moonmindology.com and you can book an appointment with me. Thank you very much. Have a lovely week. Bye.